I'm joined today by Caitlin Begg, founder of Authentic Social, an applied research lab at the intersection of sociology and technology. Caitlin future-proofs companies and universities through a sociotechnical system strategy. Caitlin, welcome to Say Hi to the Future.
Hi, so great to be here.
So, Caitlin, that's a good long word to start with, sociotechnical. So why don't we double click on that and understand what it means to us?
Yeah, sociotechnical is basically just a way to combine the ideas of people and technology. And in today's world, looking to jointly optimize people and technology. So much in our world today, our world is optimized and our daily lives are optimized for technology and not so much for people. So, what might the future look like if we could design for both people and technology at the same time?
So when you say that, it's funny how you're saying that it's designed more for technology. Do we not count as much anymore? What do we think about the future then?
I think that, especially as an American, the macro environment makes me nervous. I think that when we look at what's prioritized in venture capital funding, in conversations happening in business around the world, AI is looked at as a tool to solve and smooth and fix everything, and that
Mhm.
technology is in complete control, and that people are just supposed to stand back and let AI do the work. Well, really, what's interesting is that only under 10% of companies, as of a BCG study noted that under 10% of companies have been able to meaningfully up level with AI. And this is because they've kind of taken a jam approach of here's the software, okay, now run with it. And especially in hybrid and remote workforces, really it's important to pay attention to your people and see what might work and what little tweaks might work and figure out how you can leverage AI to have more human capital outputs and more human togetherness that can lead to better profit outcomes and things like that, but also better culture and better larger scale initiatives.
Yeah, and as you say that, I mean, just from my own work and research around human ingenuity, there's still that gap in artificial intelligence around the cognitive, around the
Yeah.
emotional, around the
Yep.
empathy. And hey, negotiating, building, speaking to people, empathy is an important one.
Yeah. That's exactly right. And that's part of what really can be lacking is that a lot of companies, especially in this accelerated environment, want to move so quickly, want to solve issues really quickly, and don't want to take the time to pause and stop and figure out what may actually be going on in our organization. And that's why at Authentic Social, we prioritize sociology and technology together. And in our applied research lab, leverage something called ethnomethodology to help organizations understand what are your employees doing on an everyday basis, because that's what's so important, especially in hybrid and remote work, is that you don't really have those same micro conversations as you once did when you were together all the time. And even if you are in the same physical space, you're interacting with a lot of people digitally. So how can we reimagine work to work with these new paradigms?
So what are some of the ways? Let's double click that because no, I think I mean we are in different but similar fields, and I've always found being in a room at least for a certain amount of time, the energy and the feed, and again the empathy, the ability to read and understand the body language, etc. It's critical in developing future thinking.
Definitely. And actually, I was listening to some of your past episodes in preparation for this podcast today, and there's one about the truth about creativity in business with Peter Krask. And he was mentioning how communication has really accelerated today and how we need to say things more than we used to, and we need to be clearer with our messaging. But part of this, the corollary to that with sociotechnical design is understanding something called hypercommunication or excess inbound or outbound communication precipitated by technology and understanding how we can manage that within our organizations. Because not only just dealing with it, but trying to streamline communications within your organization is really important when you have hybrid and remote workforces. Because as you said, you don't get to pick up on a lot of the in-person nuances. And if you're being careless with your communication, or if you're just accelerating things to the point where it's too much, it can make things really difficult. I'm working on a piece right now with Harvard Business School professor Amy Edmondson on how sociotechnical design can help reduce complex failures within the organization. And one great example of this is, say, take a sales team and pretend that you are on a demo and a VP of sales is getting pings and pings and pings during the demo from their president or CEO saying, well, this deal fell through, this deal fell through. And then the person becomes more distracted from the demo that they're on. And it's just this cycle of messaging and pings and notification culture where maybe the client might notice that the person's really not present. I mean, I've been on so many meetings where executives are, their screens lighting up and they're getting other pings and other pings. And how could we adjust our organizational culture
Right.
so you don't always have to be elsewhere, so that you can be present and really show what your competitive advantage is within the firm? And in that episode, you were also speaking about how could we relate culture and these, communication norms to business outcomes. And this is a great example of it. Is streamlined communication not only helps with employee embeddedness and employee retention, and I have data to show that my research was featured in a Harvard Business Review book, Jennifer Moss's recent book, Why Are We
Hmm.
Here? But it also helps with productivity outcomes. I mean, if you're bifurcating communication and there's 7 times the amount of channels on an everyday basis to communicate, that's not efficient. That's just not good business. And so
Right.
thinking about it in both ways is really important as we are in such a complex macro environment is that these things are not just for good culture and not just for feeling good in the workplace. They also are just good business.
Yeah, and when you say just good business, I mean, we tend to focus on symptoms, even when they are wicked challenges, and we don't actually look for the root cause. I mean, I look at us in Canada today. We allowed a lot of international students in. We wanted the brain gain, if you will. Now we've cut it off because there were, we have this incredible housing shortage. But this was shown in the data years ago. I mean, our census data said that we would have approximately 39 million people in Canada by this time. What the government created was a situation where we had 40 million.
Wow,
So they were looking at brain gain, not looking at census data, and now we're just cut off. And I feel that what you're saying really describes not just what happened to us in Canada, but generally in addressing wicked challenges.
definitely. It's something that people really address what's at the surface. And a lot of this has to do with the acceleration of communication, the acceleration of technology, is that we have so much going on at once that we can't really get to the deeper levels and the deeper, higher order thinking, ideation, creation, connection, because we're always just at the surface. I'm reading this interesting book right now about immediacy and too late capitalism, published by Verso. And Anna Kornbluh wrote it. And what's interesting is that if we are in this constant state of immediacy, how can we really ever get to anything meaningful? Or if we're just commenting on everything that happened 5 minutes ago, how can we think about to your point, some higher order effects, something that could happen a year down the line, something that could happen 6 months down the line? What are the second, third, or fourth order effects of what I'm doing right now within my organization or within my everyday life?
Yeah, and to that, so I mean, what we do a lot of, which it sounds like, we're very similar that way. I look at the situation today, but I push people out to think about outcomes, to think about their desired outcomes, how they see the world, almost that own humanistic, simulation, if you will,
Yeah.
and then come back and say, oh my God, are we resolving or solving the
Yeah.
right challenge?
Yeah, that's what's so important because it's not always the challenge that's right in front of us. It's not always the most recent notification. It's not always the email that's written in caps lock or the person that sent pings and emails and texts. It's what is
Yeah.
the bigger picture and how does that impact different employees in different parts of the business? Also making sure that different systems are conversant because a lot of times what lacks in technology is that you are in your silo, not only in our individual lives and filter bubbles when we're on social media, but also within organizations. You might have a research and development leg that has all this great research, but if you're not feeding it properly to sales and marketing, you can't link that with revenue. So
Right.
making sure that all these systems are conversant. That's why in socio-technical design and what I do, conversation and communication is at the base layer of everything. And that's why I completely redesigned Authentic Social 4 years ago, because in the pandemic, I noticed that a lot of big dysfunctions within organizations, I'm talking multi-million-dollar deals, were getting lost because of communication dysfunctions. And I went to some of my clients at the time and I said, XYZ PDQ, here's the why communication is affecting these. Let's address this. No, they didn't want to. They didn't want to. Okay, so then what I did was is I did some independent research and presented research at PhD level conferences around the US and Europe, socio-philosophical critiques about communication and the workplace and everyday conversation, how asynchronous communication affects socio-technical systems, organizations, everyday life, integrated it back into case studies and organizations and real world outcomes. And over the past 4 years have grown Authentic Social to now be an applied research lab to show that, yes, this focus on communication and base layer things is makes it so that it's not just a band-aid fix. And this is especially important in organizations who want to make sure that these different parts of their business are linked, and that if we're
Mm.
spending all this money in research, how can we link it to business outcomes? And I think that
Right.
this is especially important in today's environment because I am so passionate about the social sciences and research and development and how it's really important to our society and showing that it can make a difference and just making sure that there aren't as many silos within organizations is very important.
So Caitlin, back up a little bit from Authentic Social. Tell us, what you're doing, how you got there, and I guess what was that aha moment that you said, okay, there is a very specific opportunity, and as you describe it, it is differentiated from others.
Yeah, so I founded Authentic Social in 2016 after I wrote my undergraduate Harvard thesis in sociology on digital communication and how it affects the way that we form impressions. And I was working at LinkedIn for a year after graduation on the West Coast. I'm from northern New Jersey and have lived in New York City for the past 8 years. But when I was on the West Coast, I was getting up early before work and working on what's now Authentic Social, having different conversations with people about how to make sales and communication within organizations more human. And so 1 year after being at LinkedIn, I left to be full-time at Authentic Social, and I've been full-time since 2017. Really, the core focus has been on how to leverage communication and different personalized outreach and that human element to make business better. The competitive advantage recently has been this research and development angle because a lot of what happens that I've noticed is that there's a big silo between academic research and outcomes in the workplace. And also, things are accelerating at a pace that is really difficult for organizations to manage. So, even 5, 10 years ago, say even 8 years ago when I wrote my undergrad thesis, I mean, 8 years ago, the social media people were using most often was Facebook. People weren't even using Instagram that much, and TikTok wasn't even a thing. Things have just kept accelerating, and to keep up is its own issue. So, helping organizations to figure out how can we do that in a way that is meaningful, in a way that leverages what kind of data should we be getting? How can we get to where we want to be? And that all comes back to this designing a socio-technical future. It's linking people and technology. So some examples of this are within workplace design. So I've worked with Herman Miller, who is the parent company of, or sorry, I've worked with I've worked with Miller Knoll, the parent company of Herman Miller,
Mhm.
Knoll, Hay Design, on a socio-technical approach to place design and figuring out how we can take some of these ideas of socio-technical design and implement them into the workplace. As I mentioned before, I work with Amy Edmondson on her book Right Kind of Wrong and how organizational failures can be linked to different parts of the workplace and how socio-technical design can help reduce those complex failures. And then I speak at conferences around the US and Europe about some of these ideas as well.
So, Caitlin, you talk about Herman Knoll and you talk about the workplace. What is the workplace today? Where is it? And how does furniture even fit in?
Yeah, it's interesting because the work with Miller Knoll has really expanded my view of what the workplace looks like today, and my work with other clients in workplace design as well is that the workplace is really our everyday life, and so much is integrated with that, and making sure that we have a seamless integration between our home office and any in-person environments that we're doing is important. So, for example, if we're going into the office twice a week, making sure that employees are not on Zooms for 8 hours when they're in person, because that's going to just cause people to
Right.
not really feel satisfied with things. But it's also important to figure out what are the boundaries within your organization, because I also do some ethnomethodological research where I study public smartphone use, and I see a lot of times on the subway people just rushing and rushing and rushing and bumping into things because they're answering emails or answering notifications. How can we provide a sense of urgency within an organization, but also allow for our employees to take time when they're out of work to be able to think, reflect, and come back to work refreshed and not have burnout or constant turnover? Because not only is that bad for the mental health of the employees and the organization, but also can impact revenue.
And when you talk to that and you talk about, the workplace today and how people are working through it, one of the challenges I see are, some CEOs just going, okay, everyone's got to be back. I
Mhm.
understand in a regulatory or a regulated environment, there are some very real reasons, but how do we start to understand the dynamics of people and workflow to say, well, we have, look, if it's regulated, we have to be back, got it. If not, what is our best formula, if you will?
Yeah, I think the problem with a lot of organizations is that they tend to be top down in their return to office programs instead of having collective organization. And I'm a big proponent of that collective organization and really framing the way that you're designing everyday work. So thinking about this, if you're potentially going to bring people back to the office, let's ask the employees what they're looking for, but in a way that is targeted. Because a lot of organizations, when they're having qualitative design within the organization, they're sloppily designing their surveys. They're having someone write the questions in 2 minutes. They're sending them out once a quarter. It's not really rigorous qualitative design. You're not really understanding what do your employees really need? What do they want? What's going to make them better? And that's what I really see lacking a lot in the workplace. And you need to give them psychological safety to be able to say what they really think, because that's a lot of time the gaps that I see in organizations that come to me that need help is they say, well, we're returned to office, we're doing XYZ. And then I say, well, how did you gather data from the employees in this process? Well, either they didn't or they asked three questions that were very leading towards the outcome that the CEO already wanted. So you really want to be getting good data on an everyday basis. What would this look like for you? What would you be using the time for? And that's where these ethnomethodological approaches are important, because when you aren't around your team for every minute of every day, everyone structures their days differently. How can we figure out what is best for the team and the organization, but also what's best for our people? That is a balance to strike. And I know from an organizational standpoint, leaders will say to me, well, I don't want to say give too much freedom to the employees and think that they can just design everything. Well, that's true, but you want to make sure that they feel like they have a say in it, or else you are going to spend a lot of money replacing people constantly and having a high turnover.
Right. I mean, I think what you're saying is that there is a data point there, and if we don't study that data point, we've got a problem.
Yeah. And it also has to do with the nature of the organization when it was founded. So were you founded as a remote force organization and now you're trying to get people back into the office? Because then your people might be more introverted or more distributed, and that might be more difficult. If you were a fully in-person office and just had a different program that you're now trying to change, that's a different conversation. But it's just really also about the industry that you're in, the markets that you're serving, the people that you're working with. But really, when we're thinking about the types of work that should be done in person, it's ideation, creation, connection, and anything that involves asynchronous communication or just exchange of ideas or brief things that can be done virtually. But it is really important to have regular touch points for workplaces that even are pretty much hybrid, making sure that at least once a quarter, ideally, you're meeting with people, because there are so many parts of that in-person experience that just cannot be replicated virtually.
The other thing I think I heard you, referring to is the notion of biases. What biases we bring to work, what we hear, what we say. The CEO will say, okay, but we don't want. Um, I'm finding that when we get to the barriers stage, people are still going on the same old ones of time, money, whatever. But biases, when you drill down to it, as I've been doing through a doctoral research, biases tend to be bubbling up to maybe the number one issue,
Yeah.
even if it is a slight nod of a head or a gesture. Is that something you're finding?
Yeah. So in terms of biases, are you saying with virtual work, hybrid work, or in the office, or just as a general
I
organizational?
think just as a general organization, as you said, the CEO goes, well, I don't want these people to be designing this system. I mean, so there's a going in position, which I guess just comes up time and again.
Yeah, I think the one bias is the bias towards immediate results, and that can cloud our judgments in a lot of
Right.
ways, and can make leaders not really think about the different people and the different types of experiences that may bring our best selves to work. I know I have ADHD, and when I was at LinkedIn, it was really difficult for me to do my work sometimes because of that open work design. And I would book conference rooms sometimes during the day. We were in the office 5 days a week. Luckily, my managers were very accommodating to it, but also thinking about who are your employees, how can we best accommodate the different needs and not make it something where it's just an authoritarian regime and the whatever the CEO says goes. And there
Mhm.
is so much that we don't know about the workforce when they are hybrid or when they're remote. And if you're fully in person office, don't think that you know everything as well just because you're in the same physical space as people. But a lot of this has to do with, if you want to make sure that when you're in person, you're making the best of it and you're designing spaces for conversation. That's part of what we do at Authentic Social is sometimes people say, we brought everyone back to the office. Now what? No one's talking and we really need to make this work. Well, you need to figure out what that looks like also on an executive level. If your executives are coming into the office and they're glued to their phones and they're going right into their office and they're shutting their door and then they're not really taking a lunch and they're not being conversational, that culture is going to trickle down to your employees and it's going to
Right.
serve as an example. So that notification culture in our relationship with technology is another part of this socio-technical design that we're looking at. And it really is something that affects all organizations and really can take us out of this ideation, creation, and connection.
Right. One other general um, question here, because you're obviously dealing with some wicked challenges or disruptive challenges when you're working with companies. When you sit across from somebody in the C-suite or senior leadership, what are their wince moments? I mean, are there moments in the questioning or the process where they just go, "Oh, wow, that's a tough one. That I never thought about. How do I get to that?" Are there things emerging today?
Honestly, a lot of that comes from the communication. You'd think it seems obvious that we have 7 times the amount of conversation channels on an everyday basis than just a few decades ago. You'd think that people would realize that notification culture is harmful. But a lot of times, bringing that data to light and showing companies actually you as an executive and your relationship with technology and how you are speaking with your team members on pings and pings and pings really has a downstream effect on others. That is something where people are like, wow, okay, I need to really change the way that this works. One of the ways that we've done that is some executive workshops where we look at how they're actually starting their day. So since the 5th of September 2022, I've begun each morning without exception reading nonfiction before any phone or computer use. And there's a lot of data that shows that that's a really great thing to do, starting your day with direct and unmediated experience because we're in a state of sleep inertia and sleep drunkenness can really mess up the rest of our day. I've decreased my screen time by over 65% from that, and I speak about this on my podcast Progression to Analog. But when I'm working with executives on this and doing some workshops, a lot of times it really does have a downstream impact on their team. So it's thinking about individual and intersystem effects of if you have 10 people that are leading a 50-person organization and all those people are waking up and they're immediately glued to their phone and they're immediately getting you into a cycle of hypercommunication, well, you're not getting the right outcomes and you're not teasing the right ideas out of your team. How can we undo that culture while realizing that if you're in corporate M&A, you're going to have to be answering your phone constantly. So it's not about erasing technology. It's not about trying to get rid of it. It's about how can we leverage some analog elements and leverage some ways of thinking with a clearer head to get to some organizational outcomes because sometimes companies really are just like, what is happening? And also, something that makes people think twice is the relationship between research and revenue. That is something that people really sometimes don't understand. And when I explain it
Right.
and show the outcomes and show what can happen, that is something that is really important because there's a lot of organizations that I work with who have great missions and who I want to succeed. And it's important that we link those outcomes and that we provide our salespeople and our marketing people with the tools to show the data of what's going on within the organization.
Caitlin, let's just take a step away from the business for a second and tell us about Brain Bar, Europe's largest festival on the future.
Yeah, so Brain Bar was a really exciting opportunity for me. It was in September of last year, and I was in Budapest. I did a masterclass at MoMA, an art and design university in Budapest, the day before
Hmm.
Brain Bar, and it was about AI's impact on daily life and design and work. And then at Brain Bar, it was speaking to several hundred, or I guess probably 1,000 teenagers and people in education around interconnectivity and how it affects our everyday lives. And that was
Mhm.
really interesting to me because a lot of this stuff, if we can get it into the minds of younger generations and of educators of how we can address this hypercommunication, how we can address this at its root, that's what was really important. And so it was fun session. We did some myth busting and busting myths about technology, about, oh, it's always important to communicate this way or whatever that might be. And it really resonated with the audience. And because I think there's an interest in younger generations with some of the analog methods and analog technology or analog corollaries to how technology has taken over our lives. And Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation, is so great and speaks about how we can move away from a phone-based childhood to a play-based childhood. But what he doesn't really get at is what can the parents do to make sure that that happens. And also, speaking directly to the kids is important too, and speaking their language. Because I am a zillennial, so a kind of a mix between Gen Z and millennial, because I'm late 94. I also have a lot of younger cousins. I am able to speak to them in a language that they understand, and that phones are a part of everyday life, yes, but also direct and unmediated experience can be a part of everyday life. Something that resonates with younger people too is that I say, if you go to brunch with five friends and you've been speaking about everything exciting that's happened to you every second, and you get to brunch, well, you're not going to have anything to talk about, and then you're going to go on your phones. So why don't you save some of those exciting tidbits, and then seeing everyone in person is going to be that much more fun. Or if you want to create some more distance and patience and ability to not be addicted to your phone, try something like film photography. Try something like just different things that enable us to wait and to think about the pleasure in taking things as they come, instead of just being in this constant stream of immediacy.
When you think of that, I think of Hal Gregerson and his photography, uh,
Oh, yeah.
the prof from MIT.
Yeah.
And he's always sharing photography and stillness of the moment or what he sees, how he captures it and he carries it wherever he goes. So
Yeah.
anyway, just a thought on that for
Yeah. Maybe
for
I'll
the
have to
next
interview him.
generation.
Yeah.
But so Caitlin, it's amazing how time goes. We're nearly at 30 minutes. I'm speaking with Caitlin Begg, founder of Authentic Social. Just before we leave, tell me about your podcast, Progression to Analog, and returning to analog media to help mitigate the effects of doom scrolling.
Yeah, so Progression to Analog's a fun podcast where we're returning in a couple weeks. The episodes will be on Monday mornings and speaking about topics that happen in our everyday lives in a way that is applicable to how we can really make changes in our everyday lives. So there's one episode that I have no phones in the bedroom that speaks about beginning your day without phone or computer use and some of the benefits of that. And just in a short episode so people can digest it. There's one on the sociology of blocking and looking at why
Mhm.
blocking isn't necessarily the best way to go about conflict resolution in everyday life. And I think some of these topics we all experience, but we don't really talk about. And so I've also had really interesting conversations with Amy Edmondson from Harvard Business School, Victor Meyer-Schomburger from Oxford about guardrails and decision making in the age of AI, and trying to have more nuanced conversations about technology that aren't about completely throwing away everything and being a complete Luddite, although the Luddites, from a historical perspective, had a lot of great ideas, or and not being a someone who's a technocrat or a cybernetic imaginary person who is just really focused on technology to smooth or fix everything. Really, how can we reimagine progress as something that does involve some analog elements?
Very nice. And I've listened to a number of the episodes. I appreciate them. They are shorter, which I really enjoyed because they were very clear, very straight to the point. And I had that sort of, okay, now I can take something away. I'm not
Yeah, and
waiting and waiting and waiting. This is it.
yeah. And I think I'm trying to speak to an audience that was me 5 or 6 years ago, where I had high screen time and I was having trouble reading a lot. And now all I do is read and I have lower screen time. And I think that having shorter episodes balanced with some are longer conversations, but having it so that, if you have a quick subway ride or a quick little workout set, you can put it on and learn something.
Caitlin, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on Say Hi to the Future.
Thanks so much, Ken. Really enjoyed it.